Great, thank you.
Yes.
Now, we live in interesting times now because there's a lot
You always live in interesting times. They're just differently interesting.
Right. The idea that we can't agree about what is true in a sense. So there's a couple of different areas where this is showing up. One is in the idea of science. Even though we've advanced very far technologically, many people do not believe in science, and it causes a conflict with those that do.
Yes.
What can you say to us about knowing how to deal with that?
Well, again, you're not only experiencing the idea of different beliefs, but you might even be experiencing the idea of different realities, literally. So some people simply may not have a perception of the reality that another person has. However, in a lot of those cases, the idea simply comes from what we have just said, that there may be no real honesty in their self-investigation in terms of their belief systems. They may have great fear or have been trained to have fear as a reaction to certain things because of the definitions that they've been taught to attach to those things and what it means about the person, who may feel powerless, who may feel uneducated, who may feel unworthy, who may feel less than, so that they're unwilling to explore things that would put them in touch with the fear-based belief systems that they're attempting to avoid. So this is why, again, it's so very important to have this great honesty in your self-evaluation, because most people will generally find, if they are willing to investigate themselves deeply with great honesty and integrity, that they have simply been afraid to allow certain ideas into their lives because of what they think it means about them if they do so, or that they may find themselves unable to cope and find themselves lacking or wanting for being a more expanded consciousness. So there will be a lot of avoidance of things in a variety of ways. And I'm not just necessarily talking about one side or the other. This can happen in any particular direction. And again, this is why it's so important to have great honesty and a willingness to explore why someone might reject something or why someone might hold on to an idea a little bit harder than they otherwise might. It's always going to start with the idea of honest investigation of what you believe to be true in relation to that thing about yourself and your self-worth.
So also in the area of conspiracy theories, a lot of people are attracted to that. And is the idea that if someone is focused, highly focused on conspiracy theories, that they will generate that reality for themselves?
Of course. In fact, that's what conspiracy theories rely on.
Because are they generally negative beliefs, conspiracy theories?
Well, you can really call anything a conspiracy in the broadest sense of the term, as long as more than one person goes along with the idea, whether it's positive or negative. That's just a general idea, because the original root word conspire simply means to breathe together, to have the same ideas, to have the same thoughts that reinforce one another, and to move in a certain direction with more than just yourself, with other people who are conspiring with you to move in that direction. But there can be positive conspiracies and negative conspiracies. So the idea again comes down to, are these based on fear-based beliefs, or are they based on love-based beliefs, joy-based beliefs, empowering beliefs or disempowering beliefs? Beliefs that allow you to feel you are being controlled or manipulated or pushed in a certain direction that may not necessarily be to your benefit, or whether they are allowing you more freedom to choose and expand your consciousness as you see fit.
So when people use that term, going down the rabbit hole,
Yes.
how would you describe, what is that? Is that like falling into a belief that you can't verify is true and then allowing that to become your guiding principle?
It can be. The term falling down the rabbit hole usually means that once you have locked into a particular belief system, especially one that might be actually fundamentally negative, it's going to spiral you downward energetically in such a way to make it more challenging to find your way out of it. Because again, it's not necessarily going to be the kind of belief system that gives you the freedom to know you can choose other belief systems. You become locked into a particular belief system energy, and the negative ones make it much more challenging to know that there's even a chance of finding your way out.
So, what is like mind control? Is there such a thing? And why are people thinking they're susceptible to mind control?
Well, again, when an individual has an incredible lack of self-worth, they always look to some other authority to define their life for them. And because they feel abandoned or lost without that kind of authoritative input, they feel like they are adrift or disconnected without someone else to guide them. They will usually swallow anything that comes along that makes them feel as if someone is going to give them a purpose which they have been unable to give themselves.
Okay, so if you're trying to discern between censorship versus community, self-governing behavior, let's call it that.
Yes.
What is a good way to determine whether your beliefs or your positions are being censored, or if it's simply an idea of the greater good and whether or not a certain way of speaking might be inciting violence?
Yes. Well, some of this also will come down to the actual physical, or shall we say, sociological laws that you have instituted as part of your society. Some of it will be determined based on the laws you have created for yourselves to guide yourselves. Some of it will be based, again, on the clear understanding of what it is that you're actually connecting to within yourself and whether that energy is mechanically positive or negative. So again, it's about having the awareness, the wherewithal, the clarity, the discernment, the compass within yourself to understand when you are sharing information in alignment with what you typically refer to as the greater good, or whether you are actually going against the grain, against the flow of your true self, and disguising it maybe as the idea of the greater good. But again, real honesty would be able to tell the difference.
Okay. Thank you. That's very clarifying.
All right.
There's some questions about the galactic world.
Yes.
One question is, what is the Interstellar Alliance, and is it different from the Galactic Federation of Worlds?
Not necessarily. Again, it's a loose reference to a collective of a number of civilizations, and there are actually several. So one thing may call itself, in your language, a interstellar alliance, as we often do. Sometimes other galactic, shall we say, gatherings or collectives may refer to themselves as a different term, a collective, a federation, what have you, a council. It really doesn't matter overall, although it is important to recognize that there may be different collectives within even your galaxy.
Now, one person mentioned that in their heart they feel like in galactic life there's no need for alliances or federations. In other words, that the vibrational level is higher, and so what we perceive as a documented group or something is actually on a spirit level more about connecting vibrationally to beings of a similar ilk.
Yes, we don't have the idea of hierarchical governments in the way that many people on your planet think of it. So, yes, sometimes you might impose the human concept of hierarchies and certain kinds of organizational principles on what we refer to as an interstellar alliance, when in fact it is, as our civilization is, based more on simple synchronism, where like vibration works with like vibration very automatically and synchronistically, and simply recognizes that there is a commonality of overall vibration among a particular gathering or group of individuals or civilizations. It's nothing absolutely formal. There can sometimes be certain gatherings and so on and so forth that might represent the idea or sharing of a different direction or a new idea. and the others get to decide whether they align with it or not. But the idea simply is it's much looser than you might think. It's more based on synchronism and knowing how things work than it is in imposing a particular formal structure on these civilizations.
So, how far is your ship right now above Sedona?
About 3,000 of your miles.
Okay, and you did mention something earlier about the window of contact. Has the window of contact changed?
Well, yes. We have mentioned that because of certain changes going on now in your global society, whereas the beginning of the window of contact used to be your year of 2025, it is now 2023, so 2 years earlier.
And this just happened recently?
Yes.
Okay. And I know you interact with a lot of civilizations. So
Yes.
Are there any names that you can share with us that other civilizations call you?
Call us?
Yes, you specifically, I think.
Generally, although there are some exceptions here and there depending upon their culture, you will find that in whatever way they communicate, whatever language they may use or telepathic understanding they may have, most of them refer to us in some way, shape, or form as the halfways or the messengers.
Now, one person had a dream where they were surrounded by Essassani beings and they were told that they're getting a promotion and that it would involve a lot more responsibility. And the person felt a lot of fear about whether they could accept that level of responsibility. Could you give us an idea of maybe what the interpretation of that kind of a dream would be?
Well, in a sense, it's kind of like saying, here is a reflection of more of your own true energy. Do you have a belief system that allows you to know you are capable of handling it and expressing it in a positive and responsible way? So it's sort of like presenting someone with their potential and finding out where their belief system is relative to the potential they're being shown to see if they're ready to flow that potential through themselves. They don't have to be, but it's a good marker to show them where they're at with respect to their understanding and belief system about their ability to flow the energy they're being presented with, to be more of themselves.
Okay. All right. These questions have to do with metaphysics. One of them having to do with why do we cross-connect to other lives and then interpret that as being a quote-unquote past life? And how does that influence us when we make a cross-connection to another life?
Well, you're always sort of gathering information that you may need to inform your own experience here in this life. So the idea of connecting to other beings in what you call different time frames has a lot to do with how you actually create your physical reality anyway. Remember that, as we said, the idea that you experience space and time are illusionary side effects of your consciousness shifting through billions of parallel frames of reality every single second. So because you're shifting through different frames of parallel realities anyway to create the idea of your physical space-time reality experience, you're automatically connecting and disconnecting with different beings, different versions of yourself and other beings in these different parallel realities to inform the track you're on based on the themes you chose to explore and the challenges that you chose to face in this life. So you're drawing from a number of sources to aid and assist you. It's sort of similar to the idea of your internet in that if you need a particular piece of information, you will Google it. So it's really no different than saying, well, I need a certain kind of experiential inspiration right now, and since that already exists in a parallel reality, instead of having to learn it from scratch, why not just tap into it and download that information so I'll automatically, synchronistically get the inspiration to move forward in the way that I need to, so I don't necessarily have to go through a longer process than I need at this particular moment.
Okay. And this is an interesting question, the idea of electrons in our auric field.
Yes.
Whether or not the people we're attracted to energetically may be out of balance in a number of electrons, and we're out of balance in a number of electrons, and that's where an attraction is created? Is that?
Well, yes and no. It can be used that way. It's one way in which you can interpret the idea of the electron field that is just above your skin and part of the auric field around your body electromagnetically. But depending upon the spin rate of those electrons, will determine many different things, including possibly, potentially, in certain cases, ideas of attraction or even ideas of repulsion. Just depends on how they're spinning, what rate they're at, the rate of spin, the direction of spin, can be included in the overall vibrational sensing that you get in terms of whether or not it is important for you or germane or relevant for you to interact in certain situations with other people.
So does each version of us have a different higher self?
Yes. Because remember, the idea of a being, a person, so to speak, in the classical sense of a part of a consciousness experiencing physical reality is what goes hand in hand with that. What is automatically contained in the kit is the non-physical higher self that guides that particular personality. And that means you also, for each person, have a particular individual soul, because it's the soul that diversifies itself into the non-physical higher mind to guide the physical mind having the physical experience. Where it gets more blended together is in the idea of the oversoul, from which many singular souls can extend, and each individual soul thus creating a higher mind and a physical mind for that particular physical incarnational experience. But the oversoul can simultaneously experience all of that if it wishes to.
So when we were originally hybridized by the Anunnaki,
Yes.
what changes did they make to us that were some positive and some negative that are still with us today that we're dealing with?
It is highly likely you would not have the religious structure that you have in certain religious organizations if you didn't have that experience, because what was instilled in the genetic makeup at that time was the idea that you are required to rely on the idea of an authority figure as an intermediary between you and your connection to all that is. Therefore, that's what the religious construct is all about. Not the spiritual construct, but the religious construct of an organization that acts as a go-between between you and your connection to all that is, whereas the spiritual one does not require, as you would say, a middleman.
Did they suppress our DNA in certain ways to make us feel disconnected from Source?
To some degree, because they needed to impose themselves as the Source. Now, those markers are there and they're opening up, and you are realizing more and more that you have your own connection because you are reflections of Source. So the idea really was relatively temporary, and when the Anunnaki left and left you on your own to your own devices, and some of the more positive ones came back to guide you a little bit here and there, they knew that over time, because of the different cycles on the earth and the idea of the expansion of consciousness in general, that those markers would probably drop away or turn back on in a way that would allow you more recognition of yourselves as reflections of Source, not necessarily requiring the so-called middleman or authority figure anymore to determine your relationship to all that is.
Okay, and lastly, on the idea of nature,
Yes.
is there an ET civilization that preserves animals that are being made extinct by humans? And
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Great. Now, where are they? They just preserve the DNA?
Sometimes they preserve the DNA and regrow the animals or the foliage, the trees. Sometimes they take whole animals to that world, transport them there. You, as a human society, would rarely miss many dozens of animals of a particular species, because you're simply not always that in touch with how many of them there actually are anyway. So I will tell you that maybe not absolutely all, but just about all animal species that have ever existed on your planet, and all plant species and flower species that have ever existed on your planet, still exist on other worlds because they have been taken there in one form or another.
That is so exciting. And that means that, can that be used like to terraform other planets?
It can and often is.
Oh my goodness. Ah, that makes me feel better.
Part of that was used to create our world.
That's right, because you have species that are similar to ours in certain
Some. Now, evolution has taken some of them in different directions because our planet is different and the environment is different and so on and so forth. But we do have some that actually are almost identical to some of the species on your planet because, again, they have been seeded there for the purpose of creating a full ecosystem. Since some beings and creatures and animals and trees and flowers and so on and so forth have certain abilities, it's like sort of saying, why reinvent the wheel if they already will fit into a new ecosystem to provide that particular function to allow the ecosystem to thrive. So it's kind of like waste not, want not.
So before the humans were hybridized here, what was the Earth like? Is it like we were told about dinosaurs and, I mean...
Well, it depends on what era you're talking about. I mean, you have, as scientists, a relatively good idea, in general, of the different epochs that existed on your planet and what kind of life forms existed in them. You are missing some pieces, but not too many. But you're learning more about that. But again, remember, the idea of the hominids that existed before the Anunnaki injected their DNA were not human in the sense that you understand it. They were humanoid or human-like hominids, but not actually Homo sapiens. It took the Anunnaki genetics to turn the hominid that existed naturally on your planet, that evolved naturally on your planet, into what you now consider yourselves to be as Homo sapiens, as human beings.
So interesting, the timing of the beings that they chose to use to hybridize would all be dependent on the level of evolution that we had achieved at that particular stage.
In some senses, yes, although there was quite a wide window there, because remember, they visited your planet several hundreds of thousands of years ago. So there was quite a long window of the idea of humanoid or hominid species existing on your planet for millions of years before they arrived. They knew it might be likely that they might find such life because of what you call panspermia, where different kinds of genetic material, DNA, is delivered to different planets on comets and asteroids and meteors. And thus it is not uncommon in certain sections of the galaxy to find somewhat similar life on a variety of planets, even though there may be vast differences. Certain sections are seeded in certain ways, and therefore there are clusters of planets within the galaxies when they are capable of harboring life that have some similarity between them, whereas in other clusters there may be a very different kind of life that was seeded from a different source altogether in the galaxy. But you will find that the idea of certain similarities exist not just on individual isolated planets, but on clusters of planets within the galaxy because of the way in which certain genetic material from different kinds of beings were spread throughout the galaxy.
So what is the purpose of viruses, and are they conscious?
Everything is made of consciousness. That doesn't mean that they are self-aware in the same way that you are. The basic purpose, actually, there are a multitude of purposes. Some of them are for the purpose of maintaining the physiological genetic strength of a species and removing those that aren't necessarily strong, so they can vacuum up the genetics in a way that can be reintroduced in a way that a new species can use them to maintain strength by becoming used to the idea of the way that the virus uses the DNA material and becoming immune to the negative effects over time. So viruses fundamentally strengthen the entire population by weakening or taking out the weakened ones.
And they spur us to make new advances in our technology.
Yes. Now, there's much more to them than that, but we're not going to go deeply into that now because that's a very large topic.
Okay. Just lastly, what is the distinction between elementals and nature spirits?
Not much. The idea in general is it just depends upon the presentation of that consciousness, how it chooses to present itself. In general, you can look at it this way. There is a kind of conscious energy field that is connected to the earth, its spirit form, so to speak, because everything has a spirit form. And that energy form, that consciousness field, is very plastic, very malleable. So certain vibrational patterns of consciousness, individual beings that are not necessarily physical per se, but are discrete, distinct, self-aware patterns of consciousness within that consciousness field, have more ability to manipulate the field in a way to create what appear to be physical bodies to present themselves in a different frequency, in a different domain. And that's why they can kind of come and go. They can manifest, seemingly physiologically, but then sort of back out into the energy field, the consciousness field again, and then manifest again in a different way. That's why many nature spirits are shapeshifters and are usually invisible to many of you if your senses don't extend that far into their particular non-physical domain, and can appear to people in many different ways, in many different times, in many different places, in many different shapes. They are the expressions of the consciousness field in discrete form for particular archetypal purposes.